C'est bon, nous pouvons commencer naturellement.
Is everything all right? May we begin?
Oui, allez-y.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Bienvenue à
Welcome. Welcome to all the parliamentarians and uh, uh, civil servants to this visit, this virtual visit organized by the World Bank and the Parliamentarian Network on this region. The IMF and the World Bank have this interaction, but this is an independent organization, and there is a platform of more than 140 countries to run advocacy for greater transparency in the international financial institutions, the IFIs, as well as within the framework of any multilateral mechanism. Under normal conditions, field visits are an initiative that was launched by the World Bank. And of course, these types of visits mean that you have to be there physically in the country or in the region. But in the current context, as we well know, with the pandemic and the health crisis, we want to welcome participants within the framework of a virtual visit. Visiting Sahel this way, and this would allow participants to meet, to discuss, to have interactions with international institutions in order to illustrate the strategy of the World Bank vis-à-vis the Sahel region, focusing on infrastructures and population specifically. Now, we are going to listen to a number of speakers on the part of the World Bank, the IMF, and a speaker on behalf of Niger. These eminent speakers will definitely contribute to some very rich exchanges in a context where there is a significant increase in the rifts between a region and a greater propagation of the pandemic. This Sahelian virtual visit is that much more important because it makes it possible to have a number of discussions, exchanges on certain types of programs, greener programs, and other types of programs that are required to improve the situation. And we will also have the participation at the end of this virtual meeting, an artist who is going to visually present a number of items of this virtual visit. This will illustrate what the concrete elements are that are planned, and this should be very interesting because it will give us a visual idea. Let us recall that we also have an interpretation service. We have interpreters, and you can choose your language. So at the bottom, horizontally at the bottom of your screen, either French or English can be chosen. And you can also use a chat box to send your questions or comments by please specifying your title and name, your country, and the person whom you're addressing the question to. And there will also be a questionnaire that will be provided at the end of the meeting that we ask you to fill out so that we may be able to take into account your opinions, your uh, feedback, and so that we can integrate it. Before giving the floor to Mr. Jagana, once again, I remind you to continue to use the same language throughout the meeting that you wish to use, English or French. So, the Vice President for West Africa, West and Central Africa of the World Bank will take the floor, and the presentation is on the World Bank's strategy regarding the Sahel region. Before giving Ousmane Diagana the floor, I wanted to welcome the Mauritanian authorities, the regional vice president of West Africa and West and Central Africa, of course. Since the beginning of July 1, 2020, Mr. Diarra has been working on a great portfolio of technical assistance, assistance in terms of uh, funding of $230 million. Before this, Mr. Diagana was vice president of Human Resources at the World Bank from October 2015 to January 2018. He was the vice president rather, for the running of business and head of the World Bank Group. Before that, he was the director for the World Bank offices in Guinea, Togo, uh, in Cote d'Ivoire, and a number of other countries. And previous to that, he was country director in Mali, Niger, Togo once again, Guinea, and he was based in Bamako. Between 2006 and 2009, Mr. Yana was national director in Niger from 2004 to 2006. He was the program director in the region. Mr. Usman joined the World Bank in 1992 and he has a degree in economics, finance, and planning as well as political science. Mr. Jagana, if you can hear us, we would like to give you the floor. Thank you kindly. Thank you kindly, sir, for your kind words. I should like to welcome all the participants today to this inauguration session. And of course, this is a virtual visit, a remote visit, as it were, focusing on the Sahel region. I would like to wish you a fruitful meeting as well as a dynamic, energetic one. It is a great pleasure for me to be part of this meeting with parliamentarians, parliamentarians that are very much engaged. His Excellency Mr. Minister Rabiu, whom I'd like to particularly recognize and thank for his very warm welcome and availability during the entire time I was visiting Niger about 2 weeks ago. Only 2 weeks ago. I'd like to also uh, recognize Madame Boubacar and all my colleagues in the international organizations that are visiting us today. As you well know, today is also the World Day for the fight against desertification, a problem which is the outcome of climate change and affects a number of countries, and most specifically and most strongly the countries of the Sahel, notably Niger. And so I think it is very useful for me, I believe, to emphasize and underline the challenges that the Sahelian countries are confronted with. And also, at the same time, I wouldn't want to lose view of the fact that the Sahel and the countries that make up the Sahelian uh, region are not just countries of only challenges, difficulties. There are important opportunities in these different countries, as well as significant potential. And there is a progress that we can observe. Now, I will start to speak in English.
Had the privilege to visit the last 2 weeks ago. I can say that the Sahel and the different countries that compose this space often presented as a land of challenges and problems are also a land of promises and progress. In particular, Burkina Faso and Niger stand out in this region for holding, as you know, successful election in 2020 and 2021. And in Niger, we have seen a record participation of youth and women during the last legislative election, and also even because the country is coming from very low base regarding development indicators. There are also some signs of progress and the start of economic transformation, as I was able to witness firsthand when I was in Niamey 2 weeks ago. Yet a lot of challenges remain, and the economic and social affairs aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic risk wiping out 5 years of development gain achieved across the Sahel. During my trip, I had the pleasure to meet with many talented students who share their aspiration and hope for the future. Yes, demography is a problem for Sahelian countries, but I think there is a hope that this demographic challenge could be transformed in demographic dividend if the necessary and timely reform are made. So more than even before, I felt a sense of urgency that we need renewed solidarity to respond to the hopes and ambition of the people of Sahel. I also welcome the conclusion of the Paris Summit on financing African economy last month and the recent statement of G7 in Cornwall, which deepened the current partnership and called for a new deal with the African continent, with African state, institution, and also African expertise. Increasingly, the Sahel faces challenges that know no borders. Among those challenges, let me just name a few. First, violence, both state and non-state, that weakens the social contract and displaces population. Second, the impact of climate change, with the temperature rising 1.5 times faster than the global average, that increases the competition for resources and therefore a source of tension and conflict. And third, as I have mentioned, demographic dividend yet unrealized with low human capital at 1.2 million young people entering the market each year looking for jobs and economic opportunities. Our goal in the Sahel is to support the countries to address the root causes of conflict and focus on one, prevention, resilience, and emergency response to restore and maintain a positive state presence through integrated territorial approaches. Second, advancing reform to create job, more job, decent job, equal access to job. And third, and finally, front-loading resources and moving faster to achieve ambitious results and address the complex challenges of the region in supporting transformational programs in human capital, in infrastructure, in access to digital, etc., and making sure that those programs benefit in an inclusively manner to all the population, in particular to youth and women. To deliver results at scale, we must be strategic in our focus. And that's why we, as a region, have prioritized three main areas. First, climate, by transforming agriculture and water management, so that obviously food insecurity will not be a constant threat in Africa, but more important in this region, in Sahel, but more important actually, the living condition of the farmer can be improved and Sahel could be even a net exporter of cereal. Second area of focus, people, by investing in human capital and women's and girls' empowerment, removing the barrier that prevents from this very important group participating in the economic transformation through access to education from primary to higher education. And infrastructure by developing connectivity and improving access to electricity. As the World Bank, we have shown our strong commitment to supporting the G5 Sahel countries and doubled our level of ambition to deliver tangible results for the people of the Sahel. We have significantly scaled up financial support to Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger, but also for the neighboring countries like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, and Togo. IDA financing, which provide grant and concessional financing, increased from 2.5 billion in IDA 17, meaning about eight years ago, to 6 billion in IDA 18, about 4 years ago. Now we have set the bar even higher for IDA 19 as we speak, with the goal of reaching 8.5 billion over the 2021 and 2022 for the G5 Sahelian countries. IDA is uniquely placed to deliver results in the Sahel and beyond, either consolidate global resources from donors and capital market to support well-focused country program and development spending. Over the past 10 years, the share of IDA financing to Africa has increased steadily, and today, more than 2/3 of IDA resources goes to countries in Africa. As you know, IDA assembled an unparalleled depth of global and local expertise and deep analytical skill together with a highly efficient use of public resources. And I would like to highlight here that our strategy in deploying human resources in country pay very special attention to countries like the Sahelian country. We want to make sure that we are physically present through our country offices in having staff there, but we want to start more than that. We want to make sure that those people are talented, they have the caliber to work with the government and the private sector whose aspiration is rising and that have also more and more qualified staff. And this presence is key to get our program well designed, responsive to the country need, but also implemented in timely manner so that the result that have been defined could be achieved. As I mentioned earlier, IDA has accelerated its financing commitment in 2020 to help the world poorest country contain the impact of the pandemic. But we do not act alone. Parliamentarians, donors, and partners, many of them here today, will be paramount to ensuring a robust IDA 20 replenishment by December 2021. Our strong partnership with local and global organizations will also continue to be key to the success of IDA project on the ground. The people of the Sahel have demonstrated extraordinary resilience in the face of the challenge. But our support is needed now more than ever. I look forward to an open and candid exchange with each of you today and to working with you toward a better future for the Sahel in the months and years to come. And certainly I do regret that we are not able to do this trip together. When I was country manager in Niger about 15 years ago, I had the privilege to host this type of event in Niamey with the Parliamentary network of the World Bank. And I can tell you it has been an inspiring, an informative, and more importantly, an impactful visit because it has helped us to rethink how we can design our programs based on the feedback we did receive from you in order to achieve even more and better results. So let me stop here and thank everybody.
Merci beaucoup, Ousmane.
Thank you very much, Ousmane. Thank you for this introduction. It was quite clear and quite complete. Our participants have learned quite a bit from what you have just been saying. And now I'd like to move to the next part, which is the beginning of our virtual visit. So I will call upon the Naye, who is working for the World Bank. Thank you very much, Honorable Disanoumou. And I would like to say that we are honored by the presence of the Vice President, Mr. Akinashi, who is here today. He is Vice President for IDA. And before we get started, I would like to know if he has something he'd like to say.
Before we get into this beautiful journey. Aki, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here, Mr. Vice President.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Je suis Aki Nishio.
Thank you very much.
Je suis responsable pour leader 20.
I am the director for IDA 20, and I want to thank you for participating here today. The Sahel is a very important region for the international community, and also in the context of IDA 20. There is a great deal of interest. This region is facing many challenges. It has been deeply affected by the many crises. This is also a region that is very close to my heart, as I used to work there as the country economist for Chad. I would like to work very closely with all of the countries in this region and also with our donors in this region. This is a region that has been affected by fragility, but also a country that in IDA 20, we are hoping to achieve quite a great deal this year. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Aki, for your words. Thank you as well. And thank you, Naye. Now you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Merci encore, Honorable Disanyumu.
Thank you, Honorable Disanyumu.
Your Excellencies, honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again so much for being here. I'm delighted to give you a sneak preview into our immersive journey into the Sahel. This is a bit like our continuation of the visit we had with the Vice President, Mr. Ousmane Diagana, 2 weeks ago, where we had the chance to exchange with some of you in Burkina Faso and Niger. Nothing is more impactful than an in-person field visit to get the chance to witness the results of World Bank IDA operations on the ground, to dialogue with the clients and hear from all stakeholders who take part. You've heard from our Vice President, such opportunity to go to the field and see firsthand how we are helping deliver better services to people, working hand in hand with our clients and partners is a real game changer. But in times of COVID, traveling with a delegation is more difficult. So we want to share a similar experience and be able to travel with you virtually and safely. This virtual journey in the Sahel is a first of its kind. We want to give you a similar experience of being able to hear from beneficiaries, listen to the local authorities and the project coordinators, and get a better understanding of the development efforts happening on the ground. We hope it will leave a lasting impression. Let's take a look. Here you get a sense of the Sahel environment where climate change is a real and persistent threat to the lives and livelihoods of a growing population. The site itself is mapped around the 3 pillars of the World Bank Sahel strategy: climate, people, and infrastructure. We also have sections on partners, as partnerships are essential to maximize our collective impact in fragile settings. And in the Sahel, our close collaboration with the G5 countries, humanitarian agencies, security actors, and partners like the Sahel Alliance, the UN agencies such as ICRC, essential to support implementation efforts and reach the most vulnerable communities. Click and drag your mouse to navigate your way around the Sahel. For the purpose of this live meeting, we will be focusing on the climate pillar. Now we have opened the climate pillar. Under each of the 3 pillars, you can click on hotspots to experience relevant projects across the 5 Sahel countries. Learn about their results through audiovisual resources. And listen to various stakeholders groups, civil societies, representatives, traditional leaders, youth parliamentarians, local and national government officials, private sector, and more. Now we'd like to transport you to the Niger Climate Smart Agriculture Support Project, PASEC, and listen to the farmers and the variety of stakeholders on how the project is helping make a difference in their lives. Let's see.
Ala kai misule de ci kan farmo do hare isi du dumizan kan
har zuru go giringa wato kul kan har kan wato kul bonguno go bata mai raga sinji da harotun direct kal foira.
D'ici 2050, la population subsaharienne est susceptible de passer de 850 millions à 1,7 milliard d'habitants, constituant ainsi presque 7% de la population mondiale. Ces prédictions aboutiront à une demande alimentaire croissante. Un tel défi sera énorme, surtout dans un contexte de variabilité et de changement climatique. Au Niger et dans les pays du Sahel, l'insécurité alimentaire est un problème endémique qui a été aggravé par les effets de la pandémie de Covid-19.
En tant que stratégie de développement agricole, et donc le PASEC est un outil, un instrument d'opération de l'initiative 3N. Les Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens. Le projet a pour objectif l'augmentation de la productivité agricole et des revenus, mais aussi le renforcement de la résilience des systèmes agricoles et des populations face au changement climatique.
Nous sommes sur le site d'exploitation agricole du groupement Zamzam, qui est exploité par une quinzaine de femmes. La production est accrue et elle est diversifiée. Donc c'est un principe en tout cas d'intervention à travers l'agriculture intelligente face au climat. Elles se sont adaptées au changement climatique.
Illo koli da dai ha mai kan goyi bandan wari ke kirma ga kai da bace seda afamo ga dinya hango kaloga da dimi zan kai sir se kirga ba ma dai no rijara di gandai.
Et donc dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre, notamment aider à une meilleure gestion de la fertilité des eaux et des sols pour améliorer donc la productivité agricole, mais aussi pour créer les conditions dans le cadre de l'agriculture intelligente au climat, des techniques et technologies qui permettent non seulement l'accroissement de la production agricole, mais aussi la résilience des systèmes agricoles.
Les demi-lignes, on les fait parce que quand il pleut beaucoup, ça retient l'eau, ça empêche l'inondage du village. Le deuxième point, on fait l'ensemencement des arbres, ça retient aussi l'eau.
Ayo di maga gangsina kan lese bafuna ci kan ana farmo dogonan dise ana dumunize dogonan dise han fo koyne anino bon fere da almane kure do hare igudu dobu
abin da idi kan aran yau goyo akan din sai na fagumo wato kai isi bai an yi zai shi goy
ko taje kiyan kan da yi te sai da ci ma goy da disajo da ma sajo in ci iba funa tam disajo din a manwana kala so di bubarin ture wi da darbe kan gonga ngunon kaniga.
Nothing is more powerful than hearing from our different stakeholders on the ground. Don't you agree? We will share the link with you after the meeting so you can explore the site further. And let me tell you, it's very rich. And please share it with others and send us your feedback. We are confident that this website will become a real engagement tool that will provide a window into the extraordinary development efforts happening on the ground in the Sahel. Let me reiterate that you are all very important partners, parliamentarians, civil society, and all present here today. In this effort, we count on you to engage, act, and influence to deliver results in the Sahel and beyond, so that together we can have a greater impact. On that note, let me hand over to Honorable Disan Nyumu to chair the discussion part of the meeting. Thank you, Honorable.
Merci beaucoup, Naye.
Thank you very much, Naye. And thank you once again to Mr. Aki for his words and for the explanation that he gave. Now, before we move into questions, I would like to hear from His Excellency, the Minister of Economy from Niger. And then we can discuss some of the different questions. His Excellency Abdou Rabiou, before becoming minister, worked for the Central Bank of West African States. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you. First, I would like to thank Vice President Ousmane for the richness of his words and for the clarity of his introduction. 2 weeks ago, he went on a very long trip through the Sahel. I would like to remind you that Niger is one of the main beneficiary countries in the Sahel region. Currently, we receive about $3 billion in funds and in loans for different regional projects. There are a dozen or so projects in the region in addition to our country-based projects. You can see that in the past few years, we have seen there has been a very visible and clear transformation in this country. And this transformation has been possible thanks to the support of international partners and the World Bank. When we look deeper into this, we see that the main axes on which the World Bank has been focusing is human capital, infrastructure, and the fight against climate change, as well as agricultural transformation, water management practices. These have led to a transformation and many improvements. Not only is Niger a beneficiary of World Bank assistance, but we are also a country that has benefited from the work in this region. There have been many different initiatives of the World Bank. And I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some of the elements of the strategy that we have adopted here in Niger and how the World Bank has assisted us. Our government has specific economic goals to achieve before 2026. We would like to reduce the rate of poverty to 25% before 2026. In order to do this, we need a very clear direction, and the government has been given specific guidance. We have developed this strategy with many regional projects that have been presented before the National Assembly, that will be presented by December 2021. This strategy has to do with social and security issues. We will also work on projects to develop human capital the development of rural areas, infrastructure, exports, solidarity, and socioeconomic inclusion. For the implementation of some of these initiatives, we need to make sure that we deal with the effects of climate change, particularly with regards to agricultural transformation. The government is going to focus as well on the implementation with the help of international partners, as well as community leaders. We will use funds for adaptation programs. In terms of climate change, we also have a national plan that is very important. The overall goal is to ensure the sustainability of practices in our country. These specific goals are the following.
And especially provide information on climate change. Of course, enhance the populations, as well as enhance resilience and adaptation to climate change. Enhance and develop mitigation activities, work on reducing the desertification. So these climate change tools will have to be integrated into government policy tools involving all actors and stakeholders. And there will also be a number of interactions with environmental agents, and this so that we may be able to cooperate. We will make, there will be an emphasis on increasing the output basis, and establish low costs, especially within the framework of regional initiatives such as the uh, climate project for the Sahel. So this is what is important, and we are convinced that this will contribute greatly, especially with the involvement of all the actors. And this will, of course, go hand in hand with mechanisms of funding, dialogue, and governance. There will have to be flexibility in order to be able to reap tangible results, in order to improve the quality of life and uh, means of subsistence of the Sahel populations. So this is what we had to say in terms of the links with climate change and the Sahel region. Now, this is a coincidence in a way, because I was greatly honored to have a discussion yesterday with the executive secretary of the Group for Sahelian Countries, and he was particularly impressed by the aspiration, by the ambition that this institution has done and contributing directly from the standpoint of accountability within the framework of development actions that are currently underway within the framework of the Sahel G5. And we will also move into another context. And there I should like to make a number of suggestions within the framework of this instances or bodies inception. And so this is a very important aspect that, of course, parliamentarians endorse this type of activity. Thank you very much, Excellency, for these very clear explanations as to the guidelines and orientations for Niger. Before giving the floor to Joël and Calixte, I would like to remind the participants that they can ask questions. They may always ask questions through the chat box anytime. Once again, I should like to thank His Excellency Nyomu for his intervention, and I'd like to give the floor to Joël Nahas and Calixte. Joël, before joining the World Bank, or at this level, was in charge of operations and budget, and previously she was in Togo. We'll give the floor to Joël now for her presentation and for her intervention. Joël, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be with you today, as this is a worldwide day in the fight against desertification, and very pleased to have the Minister of Planning here, and very pleased that we will be listening to each other. Now, the fact that we are going to focus on the impact of climate change on the Sahel and on the populations of the Sahel is a very important aspect, because a number of natural disasters have devastated the Sahel, and our country, Niger, was very affected by a number of natural disasters. And while I was there, we had to bring aid to the populations and, of course, implement activities for the populations the most hardly hit. The region of the Sahel is one of the most degraded in the world from the environmental standpoint, and it is considered as being one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change, because now in that region, the temperature is actually 1.5 higher than everywhere else on average. And there is more and more degradation of the environment, and this is extending to other regions. And so the Sahel region is really confronted with very significant challenges, and mostly with the problem of desertification. Water scarcity, managing floods, as well as rainy seasons and droughts, and of course the split between the two. It has a great effect on the population, and it is extremely harsh. And the poorest population is hardly hit. That is 40% of these countries and 60% of the workforce. So the program, the UNDP, is also working hand in hand with this, especially with respect to land degradation caused by desertification. And the plan is to improve agriculture by 2100. As you well know, climate change has really set us back significantly after having reaped some progress, and after getting more and more progress. And so this means that we need to refocus our activities, and climate change has to be placed at the very heart of our activities. Institutions and investments, as I've said, as we've seen earlier with the G7 and Niger. In order to strengthen our support to these countries, a new action plan on climate change is currently being developed, and all of these actions will be carried out under the aegis of the Paris Accords. There will have to be greater alignment vis-a-vis national development plans and NDCs, and as has been presented for Niger already, this will require significant future investments. In terms of prospects and outlook, in terms of support to the Sahel countries, the World Bank and the IMF have reaffirmed their engagement, and have affirmed that they would be the appropriate institutions to face the problem of climate change and support the countries that need it the most in this respect. And of course, there will have to be resilience enhancement, there will have to be adaptation and support to the communities for on all these respects, especially to reduce the utilization of coal. I would now like to focus on future possibilities and the outlook for the region and countries such as Niger to have more sustainable development faced with the problems of climate change. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Joël, for your intervention. We will now give the floor to Calixte. Calixte is the Vice Director of the Division at the Africa Department at the IMF, and he is the Chief of Mission of the IMF in Burkina Faso. There, he is in charge of the IMF activities for the Sahel overall. I should like to give you the floor, Calixte. Thank you very much, Excellency, Honorable Minister Jomo, Honorable Ministers, Honorable Parliamentarians, dear distinguished guests and friends. The IMF is very pleased to be able to attend this event and to take stock of a number of issues that are the outcome of a number of crises and shocks that the Sahel has been subjected to and has experienced. So it is very appropriate and opportune to have this meeting. The security situation especially continues to exert great pressure on the economic situation, on the institutional network, and on organizations. The COVID 19 pandemic has exacerbated challenges, and as a consequence, real economic growth is at minus 0.6% in 2020, which is 5.6 percentage points less compared to projections before the pandemic. At a certain point, the country should undergo 4% growth, and this is what is forecast, and up to 6%. So, what is happening is that these challenges are reducing the ability of the countries of the Sahel to be able to meet the needs that go in hand with these problems, and of course, that are directly tied to the security situation or lack thereof. And therefore, the development and setting up of the G5 for the Sahel. A number of activities go hand in hand with the World Bank's efforts, and there is a lot of complementarity between organizations, as my colleagues have just said. I would also like to say that it is important that we lay solid bases to ensure the economic success and growth of the Sahel countries. And in this respect, the G5 Sahel countries need to take full stock of the problems in the region and overcome the challenges and, of course, launch vaccinations everywhere in order to fight against COVID. We will also need to create a stable environment that will be that will be able to carry growth and prosperity, shared prosperity. In order to be able to better respond to the health crisis as well as the security crisis, and of course to do so successfully, of course, urgent funds will have to be sent to the most vulnerable populations. But we need to continue to be based on economic fundamentals. And there, the national authorities should increase transparency of public spending, and social protections and safety nets will have to be provided little by little in order to ensure the return of civil servants to the cities where they may work and reduce violence. So domestic resource mobilization will be vital. There has to be international support to go hand in hand with this, and in this respect, we heard loud and clear what the World Bank has done and what it plans to do in the next years. As regards the International Monetary Fund, we have increased the fiscal space, especially for G5 Sahel countries, so that they may be better able to face the security challenges while at the same time having a possibility to reduce expenditures. About $1 billion have been disbursed for the Sahel countries since the beginning of 2020 to date. The IMF has also granted a reduction of debt by reducing by the suspension of the debt service of $110 million. So within the initiative of the G20 debt suspension initiative, I'd like to specify that the countries of the Sahel have benefited or will benefit by the end of the year of $400 million dollars in this moratorium. At the IMF, we continue to advocate for increased support to the Sahel so that the region may be able to face the pandemic and respond appropriately, and of course, grow back on the path of economic development. Specific roles have to be played responsibility and to support the economy. Of course, legislators will also be able to oversee things, especially in terms of the management of public spending. Legislators may also support efforts to stimulate domestic resource mobilization and strengthen social cohesion for the poorest of the poor. Thank you very much, Calixte. And once again, thank you, Joël, for your words. Now we shall move to another step. The next step here, this next item on the agenda allows us to give the floor to Hassan Aboubakar, who is a representative of the National Assembly of Niger. Ben Aboubakar, you have the floor now.
Merci, honorable chers participants.
Thank you, Honorable Nyongo, and dear participants. First of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting parliamentarians to this meeting. We share the visions that have been expressed, and we agree with the support provided by the World Bank towards some of our countries, especially to reduce the effects of climate change. Climate change with great and long periods of rain and then drought are a problem. And this is a significant problem because if we don't focus on reducing climate change, it will get worse and worse, especially in the northern regions. And in order to work hand in hand with the executive body in Niger, we have decided to solicit various types of support mechanisms, and especially to take into account climate change and fight against it and provide alleviation to the populations through social programs that are appropriate. A number of funding agreements have been signed, and the Niger network was set up in order to have discussions at that level. As in our quality as parliamentarians and representatives, we continue to advocate for efforts to be made to focus on the effects of climate change and better fight against these. We have to be efficient and effective. And then, of course, that will mean that international agreements will have to go hand in hand with national laws. And this will mean credits and funding that will have to be adapted and include a number of specific mechanisms. So, parliamentarians, of course, have a significant responsibility in oversight, and that can be true from the national standpoint and international standpoint. From a specific point of view, with all the parliamentarians and representatives, we want to make sure that all the conditions are united so that we may be able to create an executive device to best fight against climate change. Of course, hand in hand with due diligence and in respect of all international agreements in this topic. Oversight and governmental action is important. We need to especially make sure that the government is availing itself of the necessary tools to fight against climate change, and this in total transparency. To do so, and for any programs led by the World Bank in our countries, we are fully available and commit to work hand in hand with you unstintingly. Thank you kindly. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for this excellent and relevant presentation. We shall now give the floor to Mr. Gombo Amadou, who is the coordinator of the NGO Coordination Committee in the fight against desertification. Mr. Amadou, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. After the International Convention that was adopted as part of PASEC in Niger. We will work at the national level, and unfortunately, the interpreter is having a very hard time hearing. So we have a national program to encourage this development. Over the past few years, we have faced floods and many other natural disasters that have affected our population. So we need to develop long-term solutions in order to build our population's capacity to face these challenges. We're often divided, and we are working on different techniques for seeding and other agricultural and other improvements to agricultural practices. We are working in many different regions. This is part of our fight to mitigate the effects of climate change. But at the same time, we are fighting the challenges of insecurity and COVID-19. Many programs have been developed to assist our country, including PASEC and the ASPP. We need to ensure that we work to build resilience of our ecosystems and our communities. We need to preserve our biodiversity and develop solutions that are sustainable and solid. We are working with many local subsidiaries and local organizations in partnership in order to achieve these goals. So in this context, we are working to fight desertification and the negative effects of climate change, and we look forward to successful projects. Nigerian civil society calls upon the institutions and local and national authorities to facilitate access to climate funding mechanisms in order to fight the negative effects of climate change and to protect our different regions and ecosystems. We are working to develop a stability program in the vulnerable regions in the northwest of our country. NGOs are playing an essential role and working very closely with the national government to bring about important change in the country and to fight desertification. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gambo Amadou, for your presentation. And now we will hear from our last speaker, Frédéric Doulan. He works as a director at Natafim. Mr. Doulan, you have the floor. Mr. Doulan, are you there? Frédéric Doulan, are you here with us? So I would like to remind all our participants that you can use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask your questions. while we're waiting for the next speaker, if Frederic is not here and not connected, then we will move on to the last part. But before we move on, I would like to thank the Vice President for his speech, and I would also like to thank Their Excellencies, as well as the parliamentarians who have spoken today. And I would also like to thank all of those who are present. During the question and answer session, we will hear your questions and answer them. So we have not yet received any questions in the Q&A function, but we want to encourage you to ask questions. You can send them in the Q&A function in Zoom. Hello? Thank you, Frederic. Frederic is here. Thank you so much. I was just introducing you. I was saying that you work as a country director for Netafim. You have the floor. Yes, thank you very much. I am so sorry. My connection is not very stable, so I will turn off my video camera for this presentation. Thank you. Please go ahead, Frederic. If it might help, you are more than welcome to turn off your video. Yes, I will do that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do that, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as a representative of the private sector and a specialist in irrigation practices, I work for Netafim, a company that specializes in irrigation. We are a global leader in this, and we are very present on the African continent. So I'm here to talk to you about our experiences and our interventions in Niger. And I hope as well to talk a bit about our work in the Sahel in general. For irrigation projects, Frédéric appears to have some connection problems, and he was not able to turn off his video either, which would have allowed us to listen to him a little better. Frédéric, are you there? I think he is back. Frédéric? Frédéric, are you there?
On va peut-être passer à la question, à la session.
Perhaps we can move on to Q&A because it looks like we have just a little bit over 20 minutes left. So perhaps we can try to include Mr. Dolan later on to answer questions. Thank you, Naye, for this suggestion. Before we move on to Q&A, I wanted to ask the World Bank if they wanted to add anything before we move on to Q&A. So I wanted to know if there was anyone here who wanted to speak before we answer the one question. So here's the question that we've received. What are the top priorities for the Sahel to recover from the pandemic crisis? I give the floor to our speakers. So I think I lost my connection, unfortunately.
Les intermittences, on ne sait pas si votre connexion est stable maintenant.
Frédéric, because of the connection issues, we actually moved on to the Q&A section. in order to move on, and we were hoping that we could get your contribution a bit later, but if you think your connection is stable enough now, we're happy to listen to you. Yes, I think it is better now. I'm not sure where I left off.
Mais donc je disais, hein,
but
donc,
I was saying that Netafim has carried out irrigation programs in Niger with the SFI or the IFC. It is part of the climate resilience project. And I wanted to talk about how we have created 100 hectares of solar and water. We also have many different beneficiaries. Men and women are about 50-50, so we have parity there. We are doing creation, we're working on creation of local savoir-faire. We are working to develop knowledge exchange platforms. So something that I think is very important with regard to the drop by drop combined with solar. This is very important for the climate in Sahel, as well as issues of food insecurity. So we have created a project that will create a network or a local ecosystem in Niger with irrigation along every stop in the chain. And we have carried out studies, we have followed the implementation of this project. So this is an ecosystem that has been very important to the success of the project. And we foresee this being a long-lasting and sustainable project in Niger. All right, and now I think we will move on to questions. We can no longer hear you. Thank you very much for your intervention. So now let's move on to the Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you very much, Naye. Thank you for this suggestion. So this is the question that has been asked. And it is, after all of the different presentations we've seen, what are the top priorities for the Sahel in order to recover from the pandemic crisis? So I'd like to hear the reaction from our different speakers in response to this question. I would like to give the floor to Joëlle Das first, if she is here with us. Joëlle, are you here? Yes, I am here. Thank you. So for the COVID-19 crisis, for Niger, it has mainly been an economic crisis because Niger very rapidly took action to protect the health of its population. They implemented protection measures very quickly. They implemented different prevention measures as well. It closed its borders with Nigeria. So in addition to the pandemic crisis, we also had floods in 2020. So the country underwent a series of shocks. And these shocks have been fairly significant in their effects on the country. As the representative of the IMF said, it has had significant economic effects, and so we need to ensure the resilience of the resources of these countries. We also need to work with the private sector in order to establish partnerships there. With the support of the World Bank and other partners, we have been able to work on our response to COVID-19 with regards to health measures. I believe that we have had a very strong response, but we also need to work on the effects on social protections, as well as the economic effects on households. I think that moving forward, the situation is starting to change. We have a vaccination campaign that we are carrying out. Nigeria has reopened its border with us, and so things are starting to move a little bit more in the region. And I think that in this way, we can consolidate our economic response and also to ensure that there is not too much of a negative economic effect on individual households in the country. Thank you. Thank you very much, Joël, for your response. We have another question that has come in. And this is the question: what are the countries that do not have enough vaccines for COVID-19 for its countries? What are the measures that the World Bank and IMF are taking in order to resolve this situation? So that is the question, if you would like to respond. It is a question from someone in Uganda. So I can say that in Niger, we have a different situation because Niger actually had access to vaccines very early. Distribution has been a bit of a challenge because of the 7,000 or 8,000 doses that we have received of AstraZeneca, we have about 5,000 that have been used. So I think that Niger has had quite a bit of success with its vaccination campaign. Perhaps the situation is different in other countries, but we know that we were able to give some vaccine to Côte d'Ivoire. But I really only know about the situation here in Niger. I know that with the World Bank and the FME, there are programs to help countries implement programs to reach all members of the population with vaccination campaigns. Thank you very much. And now, of course, I will give the floor to His Excellency. If you would like to respond, you have the floor. Yes, thank you very much. To give a few more details. It is true what Joel was saying about the vaccines and the doses that we received. We were able to benefit from the COVAX facility to get doses. So we have several million doses that are available now. So we have 1,500,000 doses that are available. And we are working on distributing these vaccines to our population, but also to other countries who do not have access to all of these vaccines that we do. I know that we have sent some vaccines to Rwanda, for example, and other countries. I would also like to say that yesterday we had an announcement that 1 million doses had been distributed. Thank you very much for this very clear response. And now we had a question for the IMF. What can be done to better support agriculture in terms of techniques in order to build resilient communities? The IMF is listening to us. Caliste, if you would like to respond. Caliste, are you here with us? If not, I know that we had the Vice President here. If the Vice President is still here, would you respond to this question? Ousmane, if you are here with us, would you like to respond to any of the questions that have been asked, but particularly the last question?
Monsieur Diagana doit se connecter à une autre réunion. Alors, je ne sais pas s'il a 3 minutes.
I believe Mr. Jagana has to attend another meeting, but perhaps he has 2 or 3 minutes to devote us, and maybe some words of conclusion, and of course start to address this topic of agriculture, which is as crucial as that of the vaccination campaigns. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you, and apologies for the slight technical problems I just experienced. I wanted to thank all the participants once again, kindly, and also recognize the relevancy of the questions that have been asked. Having access to vaccines for all the countries in all the countries of Africa, overall, sub-Saharan Africa specifically, and particularly, is a priority, one of our first priorities, and we have devoted significant resources to do this, especially at the beginning of the crisis. $12 billion were dispersed in order for us to prepare quickly and to set up some programs in a very nimble and urgent fashion, as we did with some other countries, or as did other countries, but we also had some technical support in cooperation with the UN organizations, and most specifically the World Health Organization, as well as UNICEF, that had given aid for the countries to have very relevant vaccination campaigns and to make sure that priority populations be appropriately identified. To date, and if I take the example of West Africa and Central Africa, which is my region and that I covered, in most of these countries, in most of our countries, we have requirements. The requirements in about 20 countries that are significant. But we have, for 17 countries, started to finance project preparation, and some of these have been completed, and some resources have started to be dispersed. In Cape Verde, we are at the very last stages of project preparation, and we have discussions today with the African Union as well, because we believe that programs prepared individually by countries may end up being more costly in their implementation. And it is truly a group approach that has to be used through the African Union initiative in order to be more effective, in order to have a better outcome in the negotiations, and of course to finally manage to have reduced costs. We've also had discussions of some of the bigger countries, and of course with African countries, for there to be solidarity amongst everyone and the international organizations for everybody to have access to COVID-19 vaccine. The crisis has at the same time opened up some opportunities, I must say. But today what we need to know, or what we try to think about, is how will Africa itself be able to develop vaccines on its own territory to fight against COVID-19, but other diseases as well. These needs, of course, and requirements, of course, are important in our countries, specifically so. But we have had some very good discussions, and we've made quite a bit of headway with countries such as Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa, Morocco too, I should say, in order to enhance the production capacity, vaccine production capacity in countries. And since we are also in a phase now, there is some recovery, some signs of recovery, but the pandemic is still present. But we still see some small, slight signs of economic recovery. This means we have to ensure resilience. It has to be speedy, and we need to continue to focus on reforms, and also at the same time support those sectors that communicate wealth, that disseminate wealth, and that also instill hope in the populations. And this is why, when we're talking about Africa, that it evidently involves the agricultural sector, for output and production to continue and to increase and be improved. All of this is based on controlling and mastering water and having access to power at the same time. This is also based on the ability of small farm holders to be able to get good fertilizer and good seeds so that they may be able to grow quality crops. So through innovative financing and via specific ambitions, we have, let us take the example of the Kandaji Dam in Niger, and I was very fortunate to visit this dam. It is full of hope, this program, and it will be transformative. $1,400,000,000 have been mobilized by organizations such as the World Bank and the IMF and countries bilaterally as well for the Kandiji Dam. And we want to make sure that this project is making headway quickly because it will really be a significant response to the food insecurity problem. And of course, from the worldwide standpoint, but of course in the region most specifically, and of course access to electricity power will thereby be possible thanks to the Kandidi Dam, and Kandiji Dam. So once again, I wanted to thank you for your presence, and I will be available again. But right now, I have to go to another meeting. If I can free myself up before the end of their session, I will come back. But if not, then we will continue this conversation amongst ourselves and the minister. Thank you kindly, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, for the very clear presentation you have given us and for the very clear responses you have just given us now. This is the end of our session, but thank you very much. Oh, actually, there's another question. Paul Zengam is asking, within the context of the worldwide economic recovery, which players or which stakeholders can enjoy some technical or financial support, because this is what we are seeking, and what types of initiatives could be envisaged? Sukina is with us, and I wonder if she could respond to this question. Anne, brother, are you with us? Sukina Khan, would you mind repeating the country, please? The question, please, because I'm not sure I heard you very well. In the context of the current economic recovery plans, which are underway, and in the world as well, what sectors can benefit most from technical and financial support, while our governments, of course, are at the same time looking for additional vaccines? Thank you very much for this question. I think that as regards this question, we don't have one size fits all intervention for all countries. In Niger, we have a two-pronged solution for emergency solutions and emergency actions to quickly face problems such as COVID-19, because we were able to basically provide help to about 400,000 people in Niger. But in other countries, there was a relative, and most of the time, a relative decrease of poverty, but that means rather a relative increase of poverty, which means that we have to have appropriate social protection mechanisms. And after that, once aid is provided and has been provided, then people have to have their own income generating activities and have their own means of subsistence. But we must not lose sight of longer term actions, which are, of course, structural. And if these economies do not transform soon enough, we really have to remember that aspect. As regards Niger, there are a number of demographic aspects that come into play from the human standpoint. But of course, through education, through health, and of course, the emphasis being on education, girls' education, because demographic growth in Niger is such that if we do not actually address this source of fragility, it gets worse, and it'll get much worse later. So education for girls is extremely important. We have to emphasize that again and again. And access to electricity, to power, will help us greatly. Of course, these two aspects were priorities, and of course, improving the business climate as well as mobilize the private sector. So I won't get into all the details, but I would be pleased, hand in hand with the teams who could join me, provide you with some more detailed answers to these questions. Thank you so much, Sukaina. And I'd like to recall that Sukaina developed the programs with the World Bank for the Sahel countries. As I said by way of introduction, we are now reaching the end of our session. But at the very introduction of this event, I told you that there would be an artist that would join us to present the brunt of all this, the most important parts of all this in the session in a visual way. And so, first of all, I would like to thank all the participants, all those who have been involved in this meeting, the chairman, the president, and all the ministers. All the presentations were made, and we were happy to hear them. And I think that now it is time to give the floor to Zarafina, the artist, who will represent what she has done during this session from an illustrative and symbolic standpoint. Zara, if you're with
Thank you
us, you
so
have the
much.
floor.
Thank you so much. I am just about to share my screen so everyone can see the visual that we were talking about. Okay, as was mentioned, I was listening and drawing out the themes and the notes from this session to create a piece of art that you can all take with you to remember the session and to share with others that aren't here today. So to start, we obviously were going on a virtual journey instead of a live site tour through the Sahel. So we started the conversation around the World Bank strategy in the region. And what was notable about that was, although there are many challenges noted in the region, there are so many opportunities. And the strategy of the World Bank is to address the root causes of violence, to create jobs, to invest in the future-focused infrastructure. And the way that that was presented was across three focus areas: climate, people, and infrastructure. And so the rest of our talk today really went through those three themes. Also mentioned that the World Bank is interested in being physically present on the ground and supporting these initiatives through very strategic investments. The first area we covered was climate. And one of the notable pieces of climate and the climate crisis that affects this region particularly is desertification. And so, as mentioned, that is happening across the region, in addition to things like floods, natural disasters, and of course, food shortages that come from that desertification. Also mentioned was that the temperatures rising in this region are actually 1.5 times faster rising than the global average. So it makes this region one of the most vulnerable places in the world. But we did learn a bit about the transformative agricultural techniques and projects on the ground that may be around bringing seeds to farmers, around water management and conservation, and really around building climate resilience that are happening now and happening very effectively. We then talked a bit about infrastructure, and this theme seemed to thread through many of the discussions. We learned that the regional violence is very much linked to economic growth, and curbing that violence and addressing it at root cause will help with economic growth. We also heard that socioeconomic inclusion is very important for the growth of this region, including women and youth in the job market, in the education market, and having climate-focused jobs and economies of the future. And overall, that local and global partnerships and collaboration, including with the private sector, are really key to getting many of these projects off the ground. The last category we spoke a bit about that I have here is people. And it was mentioned very early on that the people of this region are extraordinarily resilient. And in addition to that, right now, they need support more than ever. So we spoke a bit about access to vaccines and how that's connected to the economic growth of the future, security and the root causes of the violence and getting that under control for the people, and also domestic resources and mobilization, things like helping with climate change challenges in the agricultural sector. But what links all of these things is that the growing population of people is really linked to both the growing demand for jobs and growing demand for food. And as we talked about, there are challenges and opportunities in each of those areas. So with that, I'll hand it back to the team, and you can expect to get this as a resource for you later from the World Bank team as well. Thank you for your time.
Merci beaucoup, Zara, pour en tout
Thank you
cas.
very much, Zara, for this beautiful and symbolic images that you have shown us in a very simple fashion. Now, we are really at the end of our session now, but once again, a few reminders. Ever since the pandemic hit, the region really started experiencing the need for even more support to get out of this difficult situation. And in the role played by parliamentarians, representatives, their role will be vital. And of course, there will have to be, and there will be oversight in the actions led by the government, and financial actions will help. We will have donors and international donors work in general with the countries, because this is impossible to do otherwise. And so, in terms of this theme, in terms of this topic, our session has come to an end. And I should like to thank all of those who have intervened, the Minister, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and all the high-level officials of the World Bank, the interpreters who, from time to time, well, we can't really see them, but we hear them, and they make it possible for us to communicate in French and in English amongst ourselves. I will tell you once again that this session, well, I would be remiss, before ending this session, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the World Bank and what the World Bank does with the IMF, of course, hand in hand, for our countries. And this is important for parliamentarians to know, and it is important with respect to any actions which will be carried out by parliamentarians and government officials. Thank you so much for attending this virtual voyage, this virtual trip in the Sahel. Thanks once again. Thank you.